I never imagined my own daughter would stand in my living room, look directly into my eyes, and say, "You are not part of this family anymore." But Ashley did. She stood beside her husband, Derek, near the fireplace where my late husband William's photograph had rested for nearly 7 years. Her arms were folded across her chest. Derek slid a thick envelope over the coffee table as though he were closing a business deal instead of trying to take control of the home I had spent a lifetime building. My grandson Noah stood silently at the bottom of the staircase, pale and frightened. "This is for the best." "Mom," Ashley said, "you can't keep living like this." I looked down at the envelope. Then I looked at the blue curtains William loved, the old maple tree outside the front window, and the walls that had carried every birthday, every grief, and every sacrifice of our family. Then I said, as calmly as I could, "Before you decide where I belong, you may want to remember whose name is on this deed. If you believe a mother's love should never be mistaken for weakness, please subscribe to Rebecca's Justice Stories. Like this video, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child tried to push you out of your home? My name is Rebecca Clark. I am 68 years old. And until that day, I believed the house on Maple Ridge Lane was the one place in the world no one could make me feel unwelcome. It was not a grand house. It never had been. It was a 2-story white home with blue shutters, a front porch, wide enough for 2 rocking chairs, and a maple tree that leaned over the driveway, as if it had spent decades protecting us from the world. William and I bought it when we were young, tired, and almost broke. He was an electrician with strong hands and a quiet sense of humor. I worked at the Willow Creek Community Library, where I spent my days returning books to shelves and helping children find stories that made them feel less alone. Neither of us came from money. We had no wealthy relatives waiting to help us. Every improvement in that house came from a decision to go without something else. William repaired the basement wiring after full shifts at work. I painted the bedrooms on weekends, often with Ashley asleep upstairs. We replaced the roof in sections. We drove old cars until the engines sounded like they were arguing with us. We saved every extra dollar, every tax refund, every small blessing. "This house has good bones," William said the first time he walked through it. The kitchen floor was scratched. The bathroom faucet screamed when you turned it. The back steps dipped low enough to make carrying groceries an adventure. But William stood in the middle of the living room, sunlight crossing his face, and saw something I could not see yet. He saw family dinners. He saw Christmas mornings. He saw a little girl running down the hallway in pajamas. And eventually, that little girl was Ashley. She had William's bright smile and my stubbornness. When she was small, she would slide across the kitchen in socks, throw her arms into the air, and shout, "Mom, watch this." I watched her take her first steps in the living room. I held her through ear infections, schoolyard disappointments, and the kind of teenage heartbreak that made her swear her life was over at 14. William marked her height on the pantry door every year. Even after she left for college, I would sometimes trace those faded pencil lines with my fingers. Motherhood is strange that way. You spend years teaching your child how to stand without you. Then one day, she does. And the quiet she leaves behind becomes its own kind of pain. Ashley went to college in Columbus. William and I worked harder than we ever admitted. I accepted extra shifts at the library. William took side jobs on weekends. If a neighbor needed a breaker replaced, a ceiling fan installed, or an old panel inspected, he was there with his toolbox. We never told Ashley how often we studied bills at the kitchen table after she went to bed during school breaks. "She deserves a chance," William would say, and I would nod, even when I was scared. For many years, Ashley seemed grateful. She called every Sunday, She came home for Thanksgiving and brought mountains of laundry. She asked William to inspect her tires before long drives. She hugged me at the door and promised she would call when she got back safely. Then she met Derek Parker. At first, I tried very hard to like him. He had good manners in the way people do when they have learned how to perform them. He brought flowers. He remembered my birthday. He spoke respectfully to William, although he never seemed fully relaxed around him. The first Christmas he visited, he stood by the window and studied the street. "This neighborhood is changing," he said. "Property values around here must be climbing." William glanced at me. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Derek worked in business consulting. I assumed he simply saw the world in numbers, forecasts, and opportunities. I did not understand that some people only notice the value of a home after they stop seeing it as a home. Ashley changed gradually after she married him. She did not become cruel overnight. That might have been easier. Instead, she became distant in small, deniable ways. Her Sunday calls became shorter. If I asked about her life, she sounded impatient. If I brought up a childhood memory, she would say, "Mom, that was years ago." She no longer asked whether I had planted tomatoes. She did not ask about my work at the library. She stopped asking whether William's knee hurt when rain was coming. William noticed long before I did. One evening, we sat on the porch watching fireflies flicker over the lawn. Ashley had canceled dinner for the third Sunday in a row. "She's drifting," he said quietly. "She's busy," I replied. "She has a marriage, a career, a life." William looked toward the darkened street. Having your own life should not mean forgetting who helped you build it. I did not answer him. I did not want him to be right. Then William got sick. Cancer does not politely ask to enter your life. It tears through the door and changes every room it touches. Suddenly, our days were divided by appointments, medication schedules, lab results, and hospital parking garages. William, who had once carried spools of wire and ladders without a complaint. I began kneading my arm just to cross the bedroom. Ashley visited at first. Then, Derek's work became complicated. Then Noah had school activities. Then there were conferences, travel, deadlines, and excuses delivered in soft voices. I never told Ashley how often William asked whether she had called. I never told him how many times I said, "She'll call tomorrow." Near the end, he spent most afternoons in his recliner by the window. He liked watching the maple tree move in the wind. One evening, he reached for my hand. "Rebecca," he whispered, "promise me something." "Anything?" "Do not let anyone make you feel like a visitor in this house." I tried to smile, but his expression stopped me. "This is my home," I said. His fingers tightened around mine. "Promise me, you will not sign anything because someone makes you feel guilty. Not for Ashley. Not for Derek. Not for anyone." I stared at him. "Why would you say that?" He looked toward the family photograph on the mantel. "Grief makes people vulnerable," he said, "and money can show you who people really are." Then he gave me the name of an attorney we had met after his diagnosis. "Charles Whitman," he said. "If anything feels wrong, you call him." William died 11 days later. After the funeral, every room in the house seemed both full of him and empty without him. His coffee mug sat in the cabinet. His reading glasses remained beside the recliner. His work boots stayed in the garage for nearly a year because moving them felt like a betrayal. Ashley cried at the funeral. I held her the way I had when she was young. And for a little while, I thought loss might bring us back together. But grief does not always soften a person. Sometimes it exposes what has been growing quietly inside them. Months passed. Ashley and Derek came less often than I expected. When they did, Derek walked through the house with a careful, assessing gaze. He asked whether the mortgage was paid off. He asked whether I had considered downsizing. He mentioned the shopping center being built 2 miles away and the new demand for homes in my area. Older houses are doing very well here, he said one afternoon. I smiled politely. This house is not for sale. His smile did not reach his eyes. Of course, he said. Just making conversation. I wanted to believe him. Loneliness has a way of making us excuse what we would immediately recognize in another person's life. Then, one Sunday afternoon, Ashley called. Her voice was unusually warm. "Mom," she said, "Derek and I have been talking. We hate the thought of you living all alone in that big house." I looked at William's empty chair. "I manage just fine." "I know you do," she said. "But Noah misses you. We all do. Maybe we could stay with you for a while. Help out. Be closer as a family." Those words found the most vulnerable place in me. We all do. I should have remembered William's warning. Instead, I remembered the little girl who used to race down my hallway in pajamas. So I said yes. Ashley, Derek, and Noah arrived on a Saturday morning in early fall. 2 cars and a rented moving truck filled the driveway. The maple leaves had just begun turning gold at the edges. Noah ran toward me before the engine had even stopped. "Grandma Rebecca!" He was 15 by then. All long legs and messy hair. He hugged me so hard I almost dropped the casserole dish I was holding. "I missed you," I whispered. "I missed you too," he said. "Mom says we're really staying this time." Ashley hugged me next. It was not quite the warm, thoughtless hug she had given me as a child, but I accepted it. Derek handed me white lilies and looked up at the house. "Still beautiful," he said. "This place has so much potential." Potential. Not memories. Not comfort. Not home. Potential. The first few days felt almost perfect. Derek repaired the loose railing on the back steps. Ashley cooked dinner and insisted I sit while she served me. Noah helped me bring old boxes down from the attic. We found Ashley's childhood copy of Little Women, her name written inside in purple marker. For a moment, she smiled, in a way I had not seen for years. I slept better that week than I had since William died. The house had footsteps again. Laughter. Doors opening and closing. Plates clinking in the kitchen. I thought the noise meant I was no longer alone. I did not understand that some noise is only the sound of people moving into your life to take over it. The changes began quietly. Ashley moved my coffee maker to another counter. "It works better here," she said. She reorganized my spice cabinet. Some of this was expired. "Mom!" Then she folded William's flannel blanket from the back of his recliner and placed it inside the hall closet. "The room looks cleaner," she said. I stood in front of that closet long after she walked away. It was only a blanket, but it felt as if someone had packed away a piece of my husband without asking. A few days later, I came home from the grocery store and found Ashley measuring the living room windows while Derek held up fabric samples. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Freshening things up," Ashley said lightly. I looked at the blue curtains I had sewn myself years ago. William used to say they made the room look bright, even when the sky was gray. "I like those curtains," I said. Ashley's smile tightened. "Mom, they're old." Derek laughed under his breath. A few updates could help the house keep its appeal. I placed the grocery bags on the table. "I'm not planning to sell it." For a second, the room went still. Then Derek smiled. "No one said you were." But Ashley did not meet my eyes. The next morning, I noticed that William and I had been moved from the center of the mantel. In our place was a large framed portrait of Ashley, Derek, and Noah. I stood staring at it until Ashley came downstairs. Doesn't it look nice? She asked. It does, I said. Where is your father's picture? She pointed to the side table. It's still there. I just thought this one should be more visible, since we all live here now. We all live here now. I repeated those words silently, and for the first time, they did not sound like a comfort. They sounded like a warning. A week later, my neighbor Linda Harper stopped me near the mailbox. Linda had lived beside us for more than 20 years. She was retired, observant, and never careless with her words. How are things with your family? She asked. Good, I said too quickly. Different, but good. Linda looked toward my driveway, where Derek was on the phone. He asked me what the Millers got for their house. She said. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. Maybe he was curious. Maybe, Linda replied. Then he asked whether I thought the new shopping center would raise values on this side of town. I forced a smile. I'm sure it was just conversation. Linda touched my arm. Rebecca, I'm not trying to upset you. I just think you should pay attention. That evening, Derek brought home expensive Italian takeout. He talked through dinner about property values, renovation trends, and how people my age often stayed in homes that were too difficult to maintain. Noah barely spoke. Ashley watched her plate. Then Derek set down his fork and said, We should talk about a practical plan. What kind of plan? I asked. Ashley looked up, but not at me. Derek leaned back in his chair. A plan for your future, Rebecca. And somewhere beneath the kitchen light, beneath the sound of Noah's uneasy breathing and my daughter's silence, I finally heard William's voice again. Do not sign anything. The next morning, Derek placed a leather folder beside my breakfast plate. He did it casually, as if he were setting down the newspaper. There's nothing urgent in there, he said. Just a few documents we should discuss. I did not touch the folder. Ashley stood at the counter making coffee. Her back was turned, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. What kind of documents? I asked. Derek gave me the smile he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. Planning documents? The house is a lot for one person to maintain. We've been thinking about ways to protect you from unexpected expenses. I don't remember asking you to think about my expenses. His smile faded slightly. Rebecca, no one is trying to upset you. We're trying to be responsible. I looked at the folder again. On the front was a bright blue sticky note in Ashley's handwriting. Mom, please read before you decide. That sentence disturbed me more than the folder itself. Why does Ashley need me to read this before I decide? I asked. Ashley turned slowly. Her face was pale. Because we talked about it, she said, and it makes sense. What makes sense? Derek opened the folder before she could answer. The first page was titled, Proposed Family Property Plan. Underneath was a paragraph about simplifying ownership, reducing future probate complications, and allowing family members to manage the home in the event of diminished capacity. My fingers went cold. There were forms for a limited power of attorney. There was a transfer on death deed. There was a document that would allow Ashley to act on my behalf for financial matters. And there was a handwritten note from Derek attached to the final page. This protects everyone. We can sell when the market is right, and use the equity for your care. I looked up. Sell when the market is right? Derek exhaled through his nose. That is not what I said. It is written in your handwriting. You're taking it out of context. Ashley stepped forward. Mom, no one wants to sell your house tomorrow. But you're 68. Things happen. What if you fall? What if your health changes? What if you need assisted living? I stared at my daughter. The question was not cruel by itself. It could have been a loving question from a concerned child. But it did not come from concern. It came from people who had already measured my windows, moved my husband's photograph, and asked my neighbor about local home prices. "I am healthy," I said. "Now," Derek answered. The word landed heavily. "Now." I closed the folder. "I will not sign anything today." Derek's voice remained calm, but something sharp moved beneath it. "No one said you had to." "Good," I said, "because I won't." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Noah came down the stairs with his backpack hanging from one shoulder. He looked from me to the folder on the table. "Are we leaving?" he asked. Ashley's head snapped toward him. "Noah." He froze. "I was just asking." "You don't need to worry about adult conversations." Derek said. Noah stared at him for a moment, then lowered his eyes. That small exchange stayed with me all day. Not because Noah had said much, because he had sounded afraid. At the library, I could not focus. I reshelved the same mystery novel twice. I answered a patron's question and realized halfway through that I had not heard what she asked. By lunchtime, I sat in the staff room, with my coffee untouched beside me. William's words kept returning. "Do not sign anything. Call Charles Whitman." I had not spoken to Charles in nearly 7 years. He had helped William update our will after the diagnosis, then sent a sympathy card after the funeral. I remembered the card because it had not been dramatic or overly familiar. It simply said, "If you ever need help understanding any documents, please call." That afternoon, I did. Charles's office was above a bakery on Main Street. The building smelled faintly of sugar and old paper. He looked older than I remembered, with silver hair and a pair of reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. But his voice was steady. "Rebecca," he said when I entered. "I'm sorry it has been so long." "So when I placed Derek's folder on his desk. "I need you to tell me whether I'm imagining things." Charles did not open it immediately. "Before I do," he said, "tell me what happened." So I told him. I told him about Ashley and Derek moving in, the curtains, the photograph, the questions about the mortgage, the papers at breakfast, the way Noah looked when he asked whether they were leaving. Charles listened without interrupting. When I finished, he opened the folder and read every page slowly. The longer he read, the quieter the office became. Finally, he folded his hands. "You were right not to sign this." My throat tightened. "Why?" "The power of attorney is written far too broadly. It gives Ashley authority to access accounts, make financial decisions, and handle real estate transactions on your behalf. But Ashley is my daughter. That does not make this document harmless." He lifted the transfer on death deed. "This would place her name directly into the ownership chain. It could create legal complications, especially if she has debt, marital problems, or judgments against her." I thought of Derek's polished shirts, his expensive watches, the restaurant meals, the way he spoke about equity as though it belonged to him. "Could they sell the house?" I asked. Charles considered the question carefully. "Not without more steps. But these documents would move them much closer to control than they should be." My hands trembled in my lap. "What should I do?" "First," he said, "do not sign or verbally agree to anything. Second, make copies of every document they give you. Third, secure your financial information. Change passwords. Speak directly with your bank. And Rebecca," he paused, "if you feel unsafe or pressured inside your own home, you need to take that seriously." Unsafe. I had not used that word, not even in my own mind. I returned home before dinner. Derek's car was in the driveway, but Ashley's was gone. I found him in the living room with a tape measure and a notebook. "What are you measuring now?" I asked. He did not look embarrassed. Just getting dimensions. For what? For renovation possibilities. I did not ask for renovations. Derek lowered the notebook. You really need to stop assuming the worst of us. I need you to stop making plans for a house that belongs to me. His jaw tightened. Everything does not have to become a fight. No, I said. Only the things you keep trying to take from me. For the first time, he looked at me without the polite mask. You are making Ashley's life harder, he said quietly. The words were soft. That made them worse. How? She worries about you? We all do. You could make this easy. I remembered the folder. I remembered Noah's frightened face. Then I remembered a truth I had spent too many years avoiding paid on. People who want to help you do not need to make you feel guilty for saying no. I am not making anything hard. I said, I am making a decision. He stared at me. Then he smiled again. But it was not a warm smile. Fine, he said. Just don't be surprised when your choices have consequences. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since Ashley moved in. The next morning, I began quietly protecting myself. I went to the bank before work. The branch manager, a woman named Marisol Vega, listened as I explained that I wanted to change my online passwords, add extra verification to my accounts, and confirm that no one else had access. She reviewed my file carefully. Then her expression changed. Mrs. Clark, she said, has anyone asked you about a transfer recently? My heart skipped. What kind of transfer? She turned her monitor slightly away from the public area and lowered her voice. Someone called 3 days ago asking about wiring funds from your savings account. They knew the last 4 digits of your account number. I could barely breathe. Was it completed? No. Our verification process stopped it because the caller could not answer the security question. I sat back in the chair. Who called? I can't say with certainty, Marisol replied. The call came from an unlisted number, but the caller identified himself as your son-in-law. The floor seemed to move beneath me. Derek had tried to access my savings. Without telling me, without my permission, for several seconds, I could not speak. Marisol reached across the desk and placed a hand near mine without touching it. Would you like me to put an alert on every account? Yes, I whispered. Please. When I got home that evening, I did not accuse Derek. Not yet. Charles had advised me to document everything. So I began. I wrote down dates, times, comments, and every strange incident I could remember. I photographed the folder. I photographed the fabric samples, the notebook Derek had left near the fireplace, and the handwritten estimate for staging and cosmetic updates I found in the trash. The estimate had been prepared by a real estate company. At the bottom was an address. My address, Maple Ridge Lane. The listing date was blank, but the document was not. My hands shook as I read it. Projected sale price, $486. Ling ling ling. Projected renovation budget, $18. Wubei. Projected seller, proceeds after closing, $440. $2. Ling ling ling. There was no mention of me. No plan for my care. No emergency fund. No place for Rebecca Clark. Only numbers. That night, Ashley came into the kitchen after Noah had gone upstairs. She looked exhausted. She wore an old sweatshirt, no makeup, and a worried expression I had not seen since she was a teenager. Mom, she said quietly, Derek says you went to the bank. I kept washing a coffee mug. I did. Why? Because someone tried to ask about transferring money from my account. Ashley went still. What? The bank told me Derek called. Her face drained of color. I'm sure there's an explanation. I set the mug in the drying rack. There may be. I would like to hear it. Ashley looked toward the living room, where Derek was speaking on the phone. He's under pressure, she whispered. I turned to face her. Under pressure from what? She did not answer. Ashley. She pressed her lips together. Tears gathered in her eyes. He had a business investment go wrong. She finally said. It was supposed to be temporary. How much money? I don't know. You don't know? He said he handled it. Does he owe money? Ashley looked down. That was answer enough. I felt something break inside me. Not because Derek had financial problems, but because my daughter had known something was wrong and still brought him into my house. Did you know about the property documents? I asked. She looked up quickly. I thought they were just planning papers. And the real estate estimate? She stared at me. What estimate? I walked to the drawer, removed the papers, and placed them in front of her. Ashley read them once. Then again. Her hand moved to her mouth. I didn't know about this, she said. I wanted to believe her, but trust had become difficult. Then why did you ask me to read those documents before deciding? Her face crumpled. Because Derek told me it was the responsible thing. He said you needed us. He said you were lonely and vulnerable and that eventually you would understand. I thought of the months after William died. The empty rooms. The silence. The way I had accepted every little change because I wanted my family near me. Loneliness had not made me weak, but it had made me easier to manipulate. Before I could respond, Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. Is there a problem? He asked. Ashley turned toward him. Did you make a listing estimate for Mom's house? Derek's expression did not change. It was not a listing estimate. It was a market analysis. Without telling me? I asked. He looked directly at me. I was trying to help. You tried to call my bank? I was asking a question. You asked about wiring money from my savings. His voice hardened. You have no idea what you're talking about. For the first time, Ashley did not immediately defend him. She looked from Derek to me. Did you call her bank? She asked. Derek's jaw tightened. It is complicated. No, I said. It is simple. You either had permission or you did not. He took one step toward me. You are turning Ashley against me. I did not move. No, Derek. Your own choices are doing that. The kitchen went quiet. Then Noah's voice came from the hallway. Mom? We all turned. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding his phone in one hand. His face was terrified. Dad said we might have to leave tonight. He said Grandma doesn't want us here anymore. My heart dropped. Noah, Ashley said quickly. That is not what is happening. But Noah looked at me. Not at Derek. Not at Ashley. At me. Grandma, he asked, his voice shaking. Are you going to make us leave? I looked at my grandson, and I understood that whatever happened next, Derek had already begun using fear as another way to control this house. And I knew I could not stay silent any longer. I did not answer Noah right away. Not because I did not know what to say, because I needed to make sure my answer was true. I walked toward him slowly and put both hands on his shoulders. Noah, I said, you have done nothing wrong. You are not being thrown out tonight. But adults have made some serious decisions without being honest. And we have to deal with that. His eyes filled with tears. Am I going to lose Grandma's house? The question broke something inside me. No, I said firmly. This is my home, and nobody is taking it from me. Behind me, Derek let out a bitter laugh. Great, he said. Now you're making promises you may not be able to keep. I turned toward him. No, I am making a promise based on facts. That is something you should have done from the beginning. Ashley stood between us, shaking. Derek, she said, tell me the truth. Did you try to get money from Mom's account? He looked at her as if she had betrayed him. You really believe her? I'm asking you a question. His silence lasted only a few seconds, but it told us everything. Ashley's face changed. For months, I had watched her avoid my eyes. I had watched her repeat his excuses, defend his pressure, and act as if I were the problem. But now she was seeing him without the story he had built around himself. I thought you said the investment was handled, she whispered. It was supposed to be. How much did you lose? Derek rubbed a hand across his face. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, Ashley said. He did not answer. I reached into the drawer and took out the real estate estimate. I placed it on the kitchen table between us. This matters too, I said. You had my house evaluated for sale. Derek looked at the document, but did not deny it. You don't understand how close we are to getting through this, he said. If we sold this place, paid down the debt, and put the rest in an account for you, everyone would be better off. I stared at him. Everyone? He gestured toward the house. You do not need all this space. Ashley and Noah need stability. You could move somewhere smaller, somewhere safer. We could make this work. There it was. Not concern. Not family. Not love. A plan. My home had never been part of his future because he cared about me. It had been part of his future because he thought it could save him from the consequences of his own choices. You were going to sell my house to pay your debts? I said. I was going to protect my family. You were going to use my grief, my age, and my loneliness as tools. Derek's face hardened. You have no idea what it is like to be under real pressure. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. I watched my husband die, I said. I raised a child while stretching one paycheck until it nearly tore. I worked through pain, fear, and exhaustion. Do not stand in my kitchen and tell me I do not understand pressure. Noah stood close beside me now. Ashley looked at Derek, with tears rolling down her face. Did you use Mom's information? She asked. He looked away. That was the moment she stopped asking. The next morning, I called Charles Whitman. I told him everything: the attempted bank transfer, the property documents, the market analysis, Derek's admission that he had debt, and the pressure inside my home. Charles listened carefully. Then he said, Rebecca, you need to bring the documents to me today, and I want you to consider asking your daughter and grandson to leave the house until this is resolved. My chest tightened. It was what I had feared. Not because I doubted it was necessary, because asking your own child to leave can feel like tearing out a piece of your heart, even when that child has helped break it. Charles continued, You can love your daughter and still protect yourself. Those two things are not opposites. So I gathered everything. The folder Derek brought to breakfast, the real estate estimate, my notes, the dates of his comments about selling, the photographs of his renovation notebook, the bank alert information. I placed them in a cardboard box that once held Christmas ornaments. It hurt to see my family's trouble stored in a box that had once carried lights and decorations. But pain does not wait for convenient containers. At Charles's office, he reviewed the papers again. Then he called Marisol at the bank with me sitting beside him. Marisol confirmed the attempted inquiry had been logged. She also told Charles that another call had been made from the same number 2 weeks earlier, asking whether my savings account could be connected to a new online payment platform. The request had been denied. Charles wrote down every detail. "Did you authorize any of this?" he asked me. "No." He nodded. "Then this is no longer merely a family disagreement." Over the next several days, Charles helped me take the steps I should have taken the moment Ashley and Derek moved in. We updated my estate plan. We created a trust that clearly protected my home and savings from unauthorized control. We removed any possibility that a broad power of attorney could be slipped into my life through guilt or pressure. And Charles sent Derek a formal letter stating that he had no authority to discuss, manage, market, transfer, or make decisions regarding my property or finances. He also advised Derek to preserve all communications related to my house and my bank accounts. The letter did not accuse him of a crime. It simply put the truth in writing. And people who depend on secrecy are often frightened by written truth. Derek became angry when he received it. He paced through the kitchen, waving the letter in one hand. "You got a lawyer against me?" he demanded. "I got a lawyer for me," I said. "You are trying to destroy this family." "No," I answered. "I'm trying to stop you from destroying it." Ashley stood near the sink. For once, she did not tell me to calm down. She did not tell me Derek was stressed. She did not ask me to give him another chance. Instead, she said, "You should have told me." Derek turned to her. "I was trying to fix things." "You lied to me?" "I was protecting you." "No," Ashley said. Her voice trembled. But she did not back down. "You were protecting yourself." He stared at her. Then he said the cruelest thing a person can say when they realize they are losing control. "You would have nothing without me." Ashley's face went still. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who had always needed reassurance that she was enough. Then she looked at him with a sadness I will never forget. "I had a mother who loved me before you came along," she said. "I had a family, and I almost helped you destroy it." Derek packed that night. Not because I shouted, not because I threatened him, because Ashley finally told him he had to leave. He filled 2 suitcases, made several angry phone calls from the driveway, and left just before midnight. The sound of his car backing away from Maple Ridge Lane was one of the loneliest sounds I had ever heard, and one of the most peaceful. But the story did not end there. Charles later discovered that Derek's failed investment was not a single mistake. He had used money from a small consulting business he ran with a partner. He had taken out personal loans without telling Ashley. He had fallen behind on payments. When creditors began calling, he started looking for a fast solution. My house was that solution. The property estimate was not an accident. The power of attorney documents were not innocent planning. The call to the bank was not a misunderstanding. They were steps. Small steps, carefully disguised as concern, all leading toward the same thing: control. Because Charles had documented everything and the bank had preserved call records, Derek's business partner was able to uncover financial irregularities in the company as well. An investigation began. Derek eventually entered a civil settlement related to the business funds and agreed to repay money he had improperly used. The bank did not lose any of my money. The attempted transfers had been stopped before anything could leave my account. But the fact that I had been protected did not erase what he had tried to do. Ashley knew that. For the first few days after Derek left, she barely spoke. She stayed in the guest room with Noah. She moved through the house, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to set down. I heard her crying once in the laundry room, but I did not rush in. Not because I did not care. Because sometimes a person must finally sit with the truth they spent too long avoiding. One morning, I found her at the kitchen table. The same table where she had once asked me to sign documents. The same table where I had spent years paying bills with William. She looked exhausted. "I'm sorry," she said. The words were quiet. Not dramatic. Not polished. Just broken. I sat across from her. For a long time, I said nothing. Ashley wiped her eyes. I keep thinking about every warning sign, she whispered. The way he talked about the house, the locks, the papers, the way he made me feel guilty for questioning him. She looked up. And the worst part is that I did the same thing to you. My throat tightened. Yes, I said softly. You did. She nodded, crying harder. I said you were not family anymore. You did. I don't know how I could say that. I looked at her for a long moment. Because you were scared. I said, because you were under pressure. Because you let someone convince you that fear was more important than love. She covered her face with both hands. But being scared does not make what I did okay. No, I replied. It doesn't. That was the hardest part of being a mother. I wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her everything would be fine. I wanted to make the pain disappear. The way I did when she was small. But she was no longer a child with a scraped knee. She was a grown woman, learning that love does not remove responsibility. I forgive you, I said at last. Ashley looked up sharply. You do? I forgive you because I do not want anger to live inside me forever. Her breath shook. But forgiveness is not the same as pretending nothing happened. I continued. Trust will take time. And my home will remain mine. No changes. No documents. No decisions made around me. Do you understand? She nodded immediately. Yes. And there is one more thing. What? You and Noah need to find another place to live. The words hurt me as soon as I said them. Ashley closed her eyes. I understand. I am not throwing you away, I said. But this house cannot become a place where you avoid your own life, and I carry the cost. You need space to rebuild honestly. I need space to heal. She nodded again. This time, she did not argue. I'll stay with my friend Monica for a while, she said. Noah can come with me? Noah heard about the decision that afternoon. He came into the living room quietly and sat beside me on the couch. Are you mad at Mom? He asked. I thought carefully before I answered. I am hurt by what she did. But I love her. Can you be both? Yes, I said. You can love someone and still need them to change. He leaned his head against my shoulder. Are you mad at me? My eyes filled with tears. Oh? Noah. Never. He was silent for a moment. Dad said you only cared about the house. I looked around the room. At William's photograph. At the old blue curtains Ashley had wanted to replace. At the maple tree moving gently outside. This house matters, I said. But not because it is worth money. It matters because it is where your grandfather and I built a life. It is where your mother grew up. It is where I get to make my own choices. He nodded slowly. Like a safe place? Yes? I whispered. Exactly like that. Ashley and Noah moved out 2 weeks later. There was no screaming. No police at the door. No ugly scene for the neighbors to watch. Ashley packed carefully. She returned William's blanket to the recliner. She put his picture back in the center of the mantel. Before leaving, she stood in the living room and looked around as though she were seeing the house for the first time. I treated it like an answer, she said. It was never an answer. I told her. What was it? I looked at the walls that had held so much of my life. It was a home. Ashley began to cry. I almost forgot the difference. After she left, the house became quiet again. But it was not the empty silence I feared after William died. It was a healing silence. A silence without secrets whispered behind closed doors. A silence where I could make coffee without worrying. Someone had moved it to prove a point. A silence where I could sit in my own living room and know I belonged there. Months later, Ashley asked me to meet her at a small diner on the edge of Willow Creek. Neutral ground. No old arguments trapped in the walls. No one trying to claim a seat they had not earned. She came alone. No Derek. No excuses. She had started therapy. She had found work at a local medical office. She was learning how to manage her own finances, even though the process embarrassed her. I'm trying to become someone I can respect, she told me. I looked at my daughter across that diner table. For the first time in a long time, I believed she meant it. Healing was not quick. It was not neat. It did not erase what had happened. But truth gave us a place to begin. Nearly a year later, I sat on my porch under the maple tree, holding a cup of coffee while autumn leaves drifted across the yard. William's photograph rested on the little table beside me. My phone buzzed. A message from Ashley. Love you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me. I looked toward the house. The house everyone thought this story was about, but it never truly was. The house was only the place where I learned the lesson. Family is not defined by who claims control over you. Family is defined by respect. Love without respect becomes manipulation. Sacrifice without boundaries becomes resentment. And forgiveness without wisdom becomes permission for the same wound to happen again. I did forgive Ashley, but I did not hand back the power to hurt me. I did not let guilt make me sign away my home, my security, or my voice. Because being a mother never meant I had to become invisible, and growing older never meant I had to surrender my dignity. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Rebecca's Justice Stories, and share it with someone who may need a reminder that love should never require them to give up their safety or self-respect. And tell me in the comments, if you were Rebecca, would you forgive Ashley after everything she allowed to happen, or would you walk away for good? I would truly love to hear your thoughts.